is Monday, February 13th, and we are at the Transportation and Environment Committee meeting. There are two items on today's agenda. First is a work session on Bill 1822, regulating the use and sale of gas-powered leaf blowers. That we will be taking up first, and then after we work on that piece of legislation, we're going to receive a briefing on an OLO report regarding the air park. So, for context, Bill 1822 was introduced at the request of the county executive last summer in June of 2022. It had a public hearing in September, and it never received a work session. And so, for everybody who wanted us to work on and pass this legislation last year, we are taking it up now, because it was not taken up last year. And so as chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee, I wanted to make sure it was one of the first things that we did, and I think this is technically our second or third meeting. And so we have added this to the agenda so that we can talk about this as we recognize spring is approaching, or as the climate continues to change. It might already be here, I'm not quite sure, but it is unseasonably warm. I don't know if any of my colleagues, either of my colleagues, have any opening comments you want to make? No? Okay, and with that, we'll turn it over to Ms. McCartney-Green.
Thank you, Chair Glass, and good morning, council members. I just also wanted to note that we do have attendees from DEP that are here in case I have them at the desk just to answer questions. But as Chair Glass mentioned, Bill 1822 had a public hearing on September 20th, and at that hearing and subsequently after, the council received 20 written testimonies, both in opposition and in support of the bill. And I would say between now and then, we've received even more communication from the public regarding Bill 1822. With that said, this bill is on behalf of the county executive, and the purpose of the bill is to ban gas-powered leaf blowers to address environmental noise and health concerns raised by county residents. In addition, DEP has also raised that it has been extremely hard to regulate the noise violation or complaints because of the growing issues and the difficulty to measure and enforce leaf blowers that no longer have a manufacturer label dates. And so our current law allows them to regulate in that area, but has been increasingly hard. From a research and public health standpoint, the noise frequency shows that it can be highly penetrative and result in being 2 to 4 times louder than an electric plug-in or battery operated leaf blower, and can have effect on being distracting during the daytime, in addition to noise having adverse health effects to auditory and hearing loss as well. With that being said, the bill specifics is pretty straightforward. It would prohibit the ban of a sale of a combustion engine powered held hand backpack or walk behind leaf blower or a leaf vacuum 6 months after the legislation is enacted. Further, it would prohibit the use of combustion engine held backpack or walk behind a year after the legislation is enacted. It will also authorize DEP a reimbursement program that would provide a partial credit subject to regulations that would further delineate how that would be implemented. In addition, it would change the enforcement requirement where currently in the law for noise violations you need 2 witnesses to initiate a complaint for a noise citation. This would only require 1 witness and a photographic demonstration of that potential violation. With that being said, council staff, along with a request from the council president last session, sent DEP a laundry list of questions, and the questions varied from the scope of the bill to implementation to the rebate program and just the effectiveness of an electric leaf blower. I want to thank DEP for providing responses to the council on that. That's in page 25 of your packet. If you look through that, there were about 13 questions. Out of that questions, Chair Glass, council staff notated a few of them that were important just for discussion. And that's on your in your packet for today under the issues for committee discussion. Before we go into that, just wanted to notate the fiscal impact statement has mentioned that over a 6-year period, expenditures could be a little bit under $1.5 million. The economics impact statement by OLO found it was unable to determine whether or not the bill would have a net or positive impact because it would depend on the rebate or reimbursement of what business owners would get from that. But stakeholders obviously that would be affected would be landscaping companies, fuel suppliers, and retail selling landscape equipment. The racial equity and social justice impact statement mentioned that the Bill 1822 could narrow racial and social disparities because of the public health impact that it would have with not being exposed to the gas-powered leaf blowers. With that, I'll stop there, and I'm ready to go into discussion from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Conversation.
So question one of your under your issues, what type of outreach and campaign and public education would occur if this bill was adopted, especially for a small landscaping business? And so looking at the fiscal statement that was submitted by OMB, it mentioned a broad outreach campaign that would include mailers to residents and businesses in the county, including radio, television, and internet ad campaigns, and that would roughly cost around $540,000. The question here is whether or not the committee wishes to discuss whether DEP should include other type of outreach campaigns or whether we thought that this was sufficient over the 3-year time frame. And one of the things that mentions that I saw DC was doing distributing lawn signs as well as a part of their outreach campaign, and so that may be something for consideration as well.
Well, let me use this as an opportunity to invite DEP up to the table. Acting Director Hochberg, Stan Edwards is here, Steve Martin, and Mary Travaglini. Good morning. Ms. Hochberg, I'll use this as an opportunity to invite you, if you have, or anyone on your team, to make any opening statements about the legislation.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Glass and Council Members Balcom and Stewart. I want to take a moment to introduce my DEP colleagues who are here with me this morning. 2 seats down from me is Stan Edwards, who is the Chief of the DEP's Energy, Climate, and Compliance Division. Next to me is Steve Martin, the Environmental Compliance Supervisor at DEP. And at the end, Mary Travaglini, who's Manager of our Organic Lawns and Landscapes Program. So we have a great team of colleagues here to help answer any questions that you may have. In terms of opening remarks, I'll keep them very brief, but just highlight that this bill is about noise and it's about public health. Gas-powered leaf blowers are a nuisance, and we've got people in the landscaping industry who are developing hearing problems as a result of extended use of gas-powered leaf blowers, and that's what this bill is primarily intended to address, with some other co-benefits as well for our environment. And happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. So one of the questions that we're dealing with right now is about the public education and the outreach. Can you share with us the administration's thoughts on that outreach, aside from, I guess, just the budget allocation or some of the communication channels?
I really like Council staff's suggestion for yard signs as well. That is something that we have used in our pet waste campaign in the past. I don't know if you've seen our signs that say something along the lines of, "There's no such thing as the poop fairy," with a little dog dressed up as a fairy, and it's very cute and catchy. So I think if we were able to, make pet waste campaigns catchy, I think we can certainly do, something similar with leaf blowers as well. And of course, we'll be, using all of our communication channels, including our website, social media, to help get the word out about this.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Wait, I'm on, right?
To the left, yeah.
Thank you very much for this. So given the racial equity and social justice report that we received on this and the impact this is going to have on our Latinx communities, particularly those who own landscaping companies and those who work for them, is there any plans to specifically target Spanish language, either newspapers, radio, television, or things like that?
Absolutely. I think that translating all of our outreach materials to Spanish would be critical because many people in the local landscaping business, whether it's a formal business or more of an informal side business, are of Latin heritage and Spanish speakers, and so we want to make sure that we are targeting them because they are currently the people who are most impacted in terms of hearing issues, hearing loss from gas-powered leaf blowers.
Councilmember Balcom.
Sure, thank you. And so this bill came to us, to this committee. was introduced and the public hearing was in the prior council, so we're playing a little bit of catch up. So I have several questions, but this particular one, I think I have two concerns about the outreach campaign. The issue is when it's going to occur. This kind of campaign, particularly as Council Stewart mentioned, we need to reach a population that typically doesn't have the same reach from the county as English-speaking residents. So the issue is the timing, and we'll get to the timing of when this rolls out, but it's going to take a while to create this marketing effort, the marketing campaign, and I would want to make sure that it's timely, comprehensive. So that's my concern, is how long it's going to take to create a campaign, how long it's going to take to roll out the campaign, and how can we ensure that the population that we need to reach, the Latinx business owners, understand and know that. So that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. And we do know from past experience that it takes time to create meaningful, impactful outreach campaigns, and it's not something that can be done overnight. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to chime in.
Yeah, I would just add that we're not starting from scratch here, fortunately, with our outreach around lawn care. And so we've been doing outreach on our recycling resource management division for a long time about leaf composting and grass cycling, and so they have lots of outreach vehicles. Ms. Travellini and the Organic Lawn Program has been doing outreach on the pesticide law and other ways to maintain the lawn. So we can build on those things. And you're correct. It will take time for us to figure out the exact messaging about this, although it's not a very complex message. Can't use a gas leaf blower, so hopefully that won't be too hard. But we do have programs set up, social media campaigns that we're doing that we can add to, mailers that go to homes that we can add to. So I think this won't be too difficult to put in place. We do with regard to enforcing a law like this, because we know that everybody doesn't get the message equally. We don't go with a citation to people that are in violation right away. We make sure they understand what the law is. Typically it's a warning. The Chief's team is terrific about this. And then if they repeat they're repeat violators, then we start to step up the enforcement. So I think there's a lot of ways we can make sure people get the message, but it will take some time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think later in we talk about enforcement and the warnings, so we'll talk about that further on, but I think that's important. Thank you.
And I will just add to that, Mr. Edwards, definitely lots of different communication channels, but what's different about this is who the recipients are, and they are not the homeowners specifically. They are the business owners, they are the landscapers, they are independent contractors. And so a majority of whom, not excluding the homeowner, but for that reason it makes it a different message, and I think even more importantly, trying a different way or needing to use a different way to communicate, because I have thoughts about whether or not landscapers and the folks that are doing the hard work day in and day out are following DEP social media, as wonderful as it is, for as many likes as I might give it in retweets, but the audiences are a little different.
No, I definitely agree with that, Councilmember Glass. The one thing I would say is the property owner that is hiring the company. So they do bear some responsibility to deliver that message.
I think that is a very fair point. Sure.
Yeah, I can just throw something in.
Yeah.
I just want to share that with the outreach campaign and notice to them, we obviously have to get creative with this, as mentioned, but you cannot run a gas-powered leaf blower without the oil mixture that's in it. And most people that are small companies are running into Strassniders and Home Depot and Lowe's and our hardware stores to get that material. So some of our early communications to get that message out would to be creative in that way. And also we have partnerships with, National Association of Landscape Professionals, et cetera, and we would want to lean on those types of partners, as well as our Spanish-speaking channels, Nextdoor, those sorts of things where the messages can get out in those other languages. But again, I think we would be looking at creative ways to get to them, and one of them is through retailers and trade partners.
I think that was a similar point I was going to ask you to make, because I think, especially leaning into the work that you had to do around Safe Grow, I feel like it's the same population of small landscape companies that sometimes can be the hardest to reach, but you already have the experience doing that over the last few years because of Safe Grow, correct? Thank you.
Ms. McCartney-Green.
Thank you. And so that wasn't a decision point, but just more of a discussion to openly talk about that. So we'll move on to number 2 in the packet. And so how would DEP offer the buyback or the rebate program for the gas-powered leaf blowers, and for how long? So as introduced, the language on lines 10 to 13 mentions that the director may establish a time-limited program based on a criteria set by regulation to partially reimburse county residents and businesses that purchase electric leaf blowers or leaf vacuums to replace combustion engine powered leaf blowers or leaf vacuums. Just looking at the fiscal impact statement provided by OMB mentions that the rebate program is for 3 years, at least at $100,000 per year. The details of the program is still not fully developed. And that's one of the things here for the committee to discuss, and for DEP to provide some feedback of how would it be equitable, what would a rollout look like, and what would regulations look like, and to kind of just discuss that here as well.
Lots of questions within that simple question. Right? I did not go to law school, but I'm familiar with one question and 33 subparts, right? So, Ms. Hochberg or Mr. Edwards, not only big question for me, the $100,000 per year, right? How did you come up with that figure?
I believe it was based on an estimate of, one resident or business owner getting up to $1,000 times however many thousand times. I'm being put on the spot here for math.
No.
For
Right.
elementary school math, getting up, so that it was based on, one person receiving about $1,000 worth of rebates. So that could be on one expensive piece of equipment, or it could be up to several, less expensive pieces of equipment, including potentially batteries as well. Especially some of the businesses that have more extensive use of the leaf blower during the day, they may actually need to tap into extra batteries, and each battery can be around $250.
You want to hop in?
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's $100. Well, it says $100 per rebate for 1,000 people. So I wasn't quite sure. The math doesn't quite work on that.
I think that's right. It was 100 for 1,000 rebates. I think the important thing about the rebate program is we don't have it figured out yet. And the law says established by regulation. And so there would be a regulatory process where we'd go through setting that up. Mm-hmm. And we would want to do some research on other places that have done these rebate programs, because it is not in Montgomery County. We don't know all the landscaping business. They're not required to register with us or register with the county. So even finding the businesses, getting them the information, that we've talked about that, the challenge of that. And, but we'd also want to understand what other jurisdictions that have done this, how they might have gone about doing it, the best way to distribute incentives, rebates.
So the primary question, I've got a lot of questions on this point, but the bill says may establish, and I think both the economic impact and the racial equity statement, most of the testimony refers to the rebate program as a critical component of remedy. And at the very least, I think that the bill should say must or will, shall. I'm not an attorney. Must. Okay. I didn't quite know that one. So we have to. I mean, it has to be part of the law. But I also think that the rough estimate is that 35,000 leaf blowers. We don't know if that's a real number or not because it's a extrapolation. But the rebate program, as estimated, would only be 3,000 blowers. So only 10% of the blowers out there are going to get a rebate. And they're only going to get $100 for the gas blower. And I understand that some of the gas blowers are old and they've been depreciated. However, the owner, whether it's a landscape company, a resident, or a small business owner, has to purchase replacement cost. And so it's a significant expense. And so I think that again, the economic impact and the racial equity talk about the rebate program as if it somewhat makes it okay or equal. It's really a very small percentage getting a very small amount of money. And the 3-year concept I don't understand because, again, going back to the communication issue, people who are going to get this rebate are people who watch your social media and look at and get something in their homeowner's mailbox, and they're going to get a rebate. And the people who are less tied into formal communications systems are going to find out about this rebate after it's already gone. And then also the 3-year issue, it rewards the procrastinators in year 2 or 3, or it rewards the people who get a warning in year 1, they get found out in year 2. So I'm not. Can you talk about the 3-year program? And I accept that we don't know what the program looks like yet.
Sure. One of the challenging things about doing a fiscal impact statement ahead of the legislation being adopted or the regulations that are called for in the legislation is you are making a rough guess. If we were to do this is what the cost would be. The important thing about the rebate program and the funding of it is it's not set in legislation, or in the fiscal impact statement. It comes in the budget process, so that's going to come down the road. But we made a best estimate. The person who was preparing that fiscal impact statement at the time made a best estimate of what they thought a reasonable program might be. Again, we need to go benchmark what other jurisdictions have done. The equity issue is one that is of great concern to us because there are many people we know who might have homeowners who might have a gas leak blower, that if they had to replace it, it's not going to be that big of an impact on them. They have the financial means to go ahead and replace that leak blower. We want to make sure the people that would have the most difficult time financially replacing that leak blower get the incentive. So figuring out how to do that is what is our challenge that's before us. So
I imagine that it would be a challenge. I find it it's difficult for me to assess this bill without fully without knowing what the rebate program is going to look like, because I'm reluctant to pit small business owners against large business owners. Who is a small business? What is that cutoff? How many leaf blowers can you get rebates for? Those are details that we won't know for a while. Yet, once the bill is passed, we don't have any control over that anymore, except from a budgetary perspective, which I appreciate that. So I think that I'm uncomfortable not knowing how this rebate program is going to work.
Well, the regulations would come to council, so you would have approval authority over the regulations. So
after the bill is passed.
after the bill.
That's my concern.
Right. And so that's the regulatory process sometimes. There are other pieces of legislation far more controversial than this where the chicken or the egg and cart before the horse causes agita to some. Councilmember Stewart.
I was just going to add a couple things related to this discussion. One of the things we found historically in our complaints about leaf blowers is that they are predominantly made against companies, landscaping companies that come in with multiple leaf blowers. Very few of our complaints are individual homeowners that have leaf blowers. Also, different people have different views on how electric equipment could replace gas equipment. But what you typically read is that for a homeowner leaf blower, now there are going to be homeowners who say, that's not true, my gas leaf blower, I need it to blow all my leaves. But typically, what we hear is from landscaping companies that gas leaf blowers provide them the power and the usability that they need in order to go from property to property to property. So I think, again, we would focus the incentive program on businesses as opposed to residents, and we would try to find a way, again, to focus on small businesses, acknowledging your point that that's difficult. What's a small business versus a large business? And again, we don't want to pit one versus the other either. So that, I guess I'm sort of just saying, here are some of our challenges that we have related to the leaf blower program. But I think those kind of things will sort of guide us in setting up the regulations about how an incentive program might work.
Great. I would thank Councilmember Balcom, because I thought the may should also be a must or shall, whatever the appropriate thing the lawyers say, because I think the rebate program is key to this all working. And I think it might be just I've spent a little bit more time looking at this as over the last couple of years. I know a lot of folks have wanted it. Worked with the mayor in Chevy Chase Village when they put theirs forward. DC has their plan in place, and it's being implemented regionally. So I think the grant program is key to all this, and I want to make sure we do it well. And so. And I know the regulations will come back to us. A couple other things, though, I'd like to see is a reporting requirement put in. So maybe after 2 years to come back to make sure, or even shorter than that, I would defer to DEP, because I know you all come back on reporting different things to council, to make sure that we didn't need to make some changes, either a budgetary change or something else. So once the regulations are done and you're implementing it, to actually put in the bill that there is a requirement to come back and to formally report to council how things are going, and so if adjustments need to be made, we can make them at that time.
If I may add just one thing with regards to rebates. The county has a climate, energy, and air quality advisory committee, and they recently drafted a letter to council on this issue, and they've done quite a bit of research on models that have been used by other jurisdictions in terms of rebates. So these residents are very knowledgeable on this issue, and we'll lean on them as well to offer us some guidance based on their learnings and on best practices from other places around the country.
I think that is a wonderful suggestion, folks on that board, to be able to share best practices from other jurisdictions, because I, in my research, have not seen much on the rebate program. I've seen how the other legislation is structured, right? And I just want to pick up on a theme that we're talking about here regarding the rebates. One, I agree that it should be geared more towards the businesses than by the individual homeowner. Because a landscape analysis of this industry shows that most of that work is being done by landscapers and by businesses of varying sizes. But there is something in the legislation that I think we need to reconcile, in that the bill bans the sale of gas leaf blowers 6 months after. And then it bans the use of gas leaf blowers 1 year after. But as currently structured, the rebate program goes on for 3 years. So is the purpose to help convert all of the leaf blowers that are out there? And if the answer is yes, then that would mean it needs to be on a truncated 1 year time according to the legislation. And then after that, you're just incentivizing people to buy something that they would normally already buy. Fair assumption? First statement?
Yeah, again, I would say it's part of the difficulty of developing a fiscal impact statement is you're always thinking about the budget implications. So would it be better to put all that money up front in the budget. And people are sometimes shy to do that are reluctant to do that because they know the budget is often constrained, and so let's try to spread the cost out, whether that's realistic or not.
So you're correct about the budget and about this not being in, or we'll find out on March 15th whether this is in the budget and for how much it is in the budget. I will assume that the legislation is currently written having $100,000 over the next 3 years, that at least in this base budget by the county executive, there will be a $100,000 line item. But again, I can't reconcile the fact that we are requiring this conversion in 1 year time, but the money to do that is spread over 3. I think that's inconsistent. And so if there's 2 options here, if the desire is to make that conversion within that year, the $300,000 that the executive has specified for this, that you all have specified, should be front-loaded into that 1 year time to make the conversion as in accordance with the law, or you space out that 1 year in accordance to the budget to make it more impactful, as my colleagues have noted, and help get it to where it needs to be. Because, as Councilmember Stewart noted, the money, the financial resources, is what's going to help many of these businesses. And so we will get to the timing in the next question or two, but I think as currently structured, there are some irreconcilable differences that we will need to work through. And I would look forward to hearing how some of the rebate programs in other jurisdictions are. Any other comments? Ms. McCartney-Green?
Chair Lass, I do want to just circle back. There were 3 points that the committee members mentioned that I think would need amendments in the bill if the committee wants to move forward. The first is, instead of changing the may to a must, would be subject by appropriations by the county council. And so that would need an amendment there to make sure that that funding is there. And so that would amend lines 10. And so if that's a motion that needs to be made to see if the committee is open to putting the language that's subject to appropriations by the county council, that this program must establish a reimbursement program.
Sure, I'll make the motion.
Councilmember Rockman, you second it? Okay, without objection.
The second one that I also heard during the discussion was to regulations to be set by a method 2. Method 2 would give the opportunity for this to come back to the council, and so I would also recommend that the language in line 11, and I'm sorry I'm putting you on the cuff, but essentially it would give the county executive the authority to set the regulations, but we use the term method 2, which allows them to come back to the council for the council to approve those actual regulations. And that's something that the committee wishes to do. That also would be need a motion as
I just need clarification on that. So right now, as it's written, the regulation doesn't have to come to us?
Right now, no. So the way it's written right now, it just says set by regulation, and that's on line 12. Typically, from a drafting standpoint, we would say the county executive is able to set regulation by method 2. That method 2 is what actually requires the CE to come back and provide them for review. They don't. If the committee doesn't review it within a certain time, then those regulations would go into effect. Typically, the committee does, and we'll have the opportunity to sit with DEP and other members to talk about whether or not there were things that you like or didn't like in the regulation, and to fully flesh that out as well. So the recommendation would be for regulations is set by method 2 by the county executive, and happy to provide additional language after committee.
Yes, I do. However, I still need to understand, and thank you for your patience. So if that happens, and this is a timing issue, that process takes a long time. How is that going to impact the implementation of this bill? So I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, and that's something to talk about as well, whether or not the regulations would be set first, or whether or not this bill would become effective. So those are things to talk through, and I'm not sure if DP has any. They've thought about the time frame as well as when those regulations would be prepared or ready for the committee to review.
Let me just jump in real quick, Ms. Edwards. So, Councilmember Balcom, your questions and concerns are legitimate and spot on, right? And I think, based on the concerns that you've shared, we would want a method too, so that it comes back to us. The other questions remain outstanding, won't be settled with this one change, but we will get to the timing further into our conversation. So you want to move
Yes,
to
please.
method 2?
Second.
Seconded, without objection.
The last point to raise was, I think, Councilmember Stewart mentioned the annual reporting, and that would be for, I'm not sure if it was every 1 year or every 2 years or where that was, but that's also something from a drafting perspective. We can amend the language to require DEP to come back to the committee to provide some type of reporting on the program itself and other budgetary concerns.
Right. And I would move that, and I think, again, it goes to a timing issue, so whether or not it's 1 year, it's after 1 year or 2 years, I think we'll know better after we talk about timing, but I would move that we have some language in there about reporting back to.
And if I could just ask for clarification, so clearly there's a budgetary cost assigned that will be reported out either in the budget or we can do a semi-annual update or something like that. Is there something in addition to that?
I think it's who are we reaching? So it's not just going back to our concerns that Councilmember Balcom and I have both raised, all three of us have raised, is that given the racial equity and social justice statement, we know this is going to impact Latino community greater than others. And so just making sure we're doing that, and that if there needs to be adjustments.
So if I could refine it or maybe to set the expectation, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it needs to probably be delineated so specifically, but the question then is who is receiving the funding, right? Through
Yes.
that, and then through that analysis, a list, we can kind of spot check to see.
Yep.
So I think it would be as important to see who's receiving the fines.
Yep.
From a racial equity social justice issue.
Yep.
You mean from presumably homeowners calling in?
Well, so the issue is, well, we're going to get to enforcement
Yeah,
next,
okay.
right? But if we're talking about reporting, I think that one of the challenges is going to be reaching the Latinx community, the small business owners. So I think it would be interesting, after all is said and done, who is receiving these fines, and is there a negative racial impact to who's receiving the fines?
So I have some discomfort with, I understand the point that you're trying to get at. I do have some discomfort with DEP. There's a county attorney sitting next to me here who could, classifying people in some way, and
I appreciate that, and it may not be doable.
And again, I think our primary goal with respect to enforcement, we're trying to get people to understand the law and comply with the law. And so our first intent is not to write a citation to somebody. We want to make sure that someone, if they violate the law, particularly something like this, which is annoying, yes, but is not life-threatening, not a life or public safety issue in the immediate occurrence of it. We want to make sure if someone is using a leaf blower that's a gas leaf blower, and we say to them, you can't use this gas leaf blower, they say, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, now you know it. Let's get your information. Here's you know you can't use it, and hopefully we won't have that issue come up again. And if it does, then maybe we go to what's the interim between just a talk? A notice of violation, which is a more formal, but still not a citation, and then we go to a citation. I mean, we'll have to see how this plays out, because, again, our goal is not to fine people. Our goal is to get compliance. Our goal is not to impose a particular requirement on people who may not have received the message as well as others. So we'll do everything we can to avoid issuing fines while getting compliance with the law. So.
Accept that.
And if I could just say that I think there's a lot of unknowns, and you've brought up the unknowns, and some of the reaching the communities that are disproportionately affected, as you can see the intent of the law, a lot of the noise impacts. We want to go after people who use the leaf blowers the most. It's affecting the communities they serve, and it's affecting them personally. with their hearing loss, et cetera. And so we may have a business that is white-owned, Asian-owned, black-owned, but maybe the majority of their workers are the Latinx workers. So we would have to find a way to see what we can do legally and safely to track, but to me, it's not about who owns the business. It's about who's using those leaf blowers for the most hours out of the week.
Fair point. So you're making a motion
Yes.
for the
Reporting
annual
language.
reporting?
Annual reporting, does that work? I'm looking at the DEP staff.
If council wishes annual reporting, we can report annually. We can also do, biannual every other year as well.
Yeah. Let's say annually for now, and then may revisit depending on what we're talking about timing-wise.
Great. Without objection.
And I will provide language for DEP and for the committee to review before, if this bill moves forward for final action.
Yeah, and again, just setting expectation, a list basically of who's received these funds, and if there have been any either, I don't know if we're going to get into the warnings, but definitely the fines.
Although I accept the issue of, it's not as if you're going to know the ethnic, racial background of the person getting the fine. So I accept that may not be the issue.
So
And not to complicate things more, but if DEP had recommendations for changing things, we would expect that to be in the report as well. And I'm sure you would do that. Even
We can certainly report on number of warnings given, number of citations given, number of, so a whole range of things.
And Councilmember Stewart, whether or not it's actually in the legislation, I'm somewhat agnostic to it actually being in the legislation, because as long as there are funds allocated, it will be part of our budget
Yeah,
conversation.
absolutely.
Okay.
Understood. Moving on to number 3, which we've kind of nudged and talked a little bit about. How will this ban be enforced? What are the penalties and alternative enforcement options? And so, as previously mentioned, this bill will now require that a single noise complaint by a witness with photographic evidence of a person using a gas-powered leaf blower may result in a Class A citation on the first offense, and that's up to $500 initially and up to $750 for repeated offenses. I will note that I spoke with DEP, and their process is to at least use a warning base first. And while that may be the process, just from a drafting standpoint and what's in the legislation, looking at line 19, an enforcement officer may issue a civil citation, and so that's really up to their discretion. The committee has the opportunity here to specifically say a written warning first offense, and then obviously a civil citation on the second. And so it's just a matter of what's practice and what we're legislating here. But from my understanding, practice is a written warning. What's actually here says may, which gives them the discretion whether or not they want to issue that written warning or issue a civil citation, depending on the violator.
So the intent of the bill is to get people to convert to electric, and whatever tools are necessary, whether it's a conversation, a warning, a citation, I leave that to the executive branch and DEP to determine. I don't think that this is a high crime or misdemeanor necessarily, but it is something we want to encourage people to do. And so however we can do that civilly, neighborly, I would be supportive of. And if you all think that the way it's currently written would suffice, then I'm fine with the existing language.
I feel strongly that there needs to be a warning. The way the language is, it allows for the first offense to be a citation. And I think that what's going to happen is, I would guess that many of the complaints will be for people who aren't aware that this is a law. I don't, perhaps that's in the regulation again. I don't know. But I can assume that, I think that we can assume that at least at the beginning, most of the people that have complaints are going to be against people who aren't aware, especially given what we talked about from the beginning of the marketing campaign to reach small business owners who aren't aware of formal communication structures. So,
So if I
go ahead.
could
Yep.
help form, right, some legislative language with the thought that you have. Legislation, line 24, an enforcement officer may issue a civil citation, and you're correctly reading into it that they may not and may provide a fine, right? That's your that isn't a valid interpretation. So would you want to change that to must offer a warning, or what? Or is it a citation, or is it the regulation that would then help further define that?
I think the
No.
regulation would help. I think the 24, that goes into a different, I think if there would be a change, it would be a change in 19, but
Mr. Martin?
Yeah, if I may, I just want to provide some clarification and an overall view of how we do our enforcement process.
Thank you.
So Stan and I have worked together for a long time, and our philosophy has always been what we call compliance assistance. We try to assist people to come into compliance. So our first step is always education. Make contact, provide educational materials, inform them of the law. And this is regardless of whatever code we're enforcing: air quality, water quality, illegal dumping. And, the second phase would be a warning letter, something like that. It doesn't carry any kind of fines. If we can't get the message through, number one, education, number two, a warning, then number three, as Stan mentioned, is a notice of violation. And that's a formal written notice that you're in violation of the code. And if you don't knock it off now, then you could be subject to civil citations and fines and whatever. If that, with the compliance plan, the notice of violation, we have the option to require that they submit a plan for compliance. To tell us how you're going to come into compliance with the law. So if they fail to submit the plan for compliance, then we can write them a civil citation for failure to submit the plan. If none of that works, then we can finally go to the civil citation. And that's the fourth and final step in the enforcement process. So we use that regardless of whatever code.
In this case, the plan would be to simply say, I'm buying
Yes.
fleet of...
And it would have a time frame in it. You have to, and it has to come to us, it has to be approved by us, and then they can proceed.
As you say, in this case, the plan might be, I understand that I can't no longer use my gas leaf blower. One thing I just want to say, so Mr. Martin's team enforces a whole range of environmental laws, and I don't want to give the impression that if someone is backing a truck up and dumping used oil into a stream, we're saying, hey, you're not supposed to be doing that. We take the appropriate enforcement for the action that occurs. So, but he has a terrific team, very experienced, and they are very adept at understanding the situation and applying the appropriate enforcement tool for the situation.
I appreciate that. That's fine. One other question of I know this is nuanced, but who actually gets the citation? The person who owns the leaf blower, or the person using the leaf blower? So in a residential scenario, if you have a gardener using the homeowner's leaf blower, the homeowner would get that citation. Okay.
Same way as a business, we're not going to cite the individual staff out there using the blower. We're going after
Right.
landscape business.
And the thank you. And the photo evidence. So the inspector goes out and inspects. The photo, I guess, evidence is just to initiate the complaint.
Well, this is an interesting provision of this law that one of the things about noise is it's fleeting, right? We get noise complaints. We have a relatively small enforcement team for 500 square miles of the county. So a noise complaint, someone's using a loud leaf blower right now. There are leaf blower provisions now about the amount of noise they make. So we get a call, someone's using a leaf blower in Silver Spring, staff member may be in the area, they can go check it out. By the time they get there, the leaf blower's gone. Sometimes it's not. And so this provision was put in there to try to help us be able to enforce this, recognizing that we can't be everywhere. And so someone could submit photographic evidence. Now that, we've never done this. This is new. In practice, we'll see how that works out, because if I've got my iPhone and I take a picture of someone 2 houses away with what I think is a gas-powered leaf blower, our team's not going to be able to look at that and go, yeah, well, they may be able to. It depends on the picture, because sometimes you can see the gas tank on the leaf blower. But that allows us then to start the enforcement process, which, as Mr. Martin described, could be a letter saying there was an allegation that a gas-powered leaf blower was used. Please be advised that the county has banned the use of gas-powered leaf blowers.
What if the response is, nope, that wasn't me?
So we've got the individual's information now. We know what company they are or what address they were. So if another complaint comes in, we've got another allegation that you're using gas blower. We may send an investigator out at that point to say, we'll meet you tell us where you're going to be, we'll meet you there, show us your leaf blowers. And that's the way we can sort of step up that enforcement.
Thank you.
So I think we're okay.
I just had a clarifying question, and I thank Councilmember Balcom for raising that, because I think the warning is important, and I appreciate you laying out how you do the work. I also had a question about how the fines would be. So, would it be like once you went through all this and you worked with the person, and you saw folks out using the gas-powered leaf blowers, would the fine be $500 per leaf blower, or for a violation that you are now using leaf blowers on this property at this one time and should not be? Or do you know the answer to that question?
That's a good question.
Literally, it could be $500 per leaf blower. But
Yeah,
that's not the way we do it.
Yeah.
If the landscape company was using 2 or 3 leaf blowers, it would be one fine.
yeah. And that might be something we work out in the regulations to clarify that.
So just a couple points about it. One, the regulations speak to the incentive program.
Right.
We weren't going to describe any other
Or the other piece of, okay,
enforcement process. Now,
thank you.
if the law was amended to say, please describe your enforcement process, we're happy to do that, although I personally don't think that's necessary.
No.
The other part of the enforcement spectrum that is important to point out is that we can issue a citation. If someone challenges that citation, then it goes to district court, and I'll just say that's a whole part of the process that we have no control over, and that process can take a long, long time, and the resulting fine may be lowered, may be eliminated. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, so the person that submits the photo might have to go to court and testify to the judge that, yes, Your Honor, I took this photo. It's a fair and accurate depiction of what I saw that day.
Yeah, no, I was just curious and I don't know if we feel like we need to clarify that at all, or leave it up to the folks who are going to be.
I think that the intent and expectation as stated in this public hearing provides a good roadmap for using these enforcement mechanisms.
I think when council drafted this, the consideration of the annual report wasn't there, and so now that the committee will have that opportunity, those are times to also raise that discussion of the enforcement process and how that's working. And so this would be per complaint, so a noise complaint, not per leaf blower. But as you mentioned, the violator, they have the rights to challenge that. That's with any noise complaint as well, and so this is also in line with that process.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep, moving on to number 4, a timeline for implementation and phase-in approach. And so as proposed in this bill, the transition period will prohibit the sale of a gas-powered leaf blower 6 months after enactment. And I do want to know that when any county law that's enacted, it's a 3-month period first, 90 days, and then after the 90 days, that's when this time period. So this is really a total of 9 months, just to be clear. And so enactment occurs 3 months after the county council and the executive has signed the bill, and then so 6 months after enactment. And then this says 1 year would prohibit any usage. Council staff also looked at a few other jurisdictions that have implemented a phase-in leaf blower program. California, they had a 3-year phase-in after the governor had signed into law banning the sale of gas-powered leaf blowers. Washington, D.C. implemented a 3-year phased-in approach, and then the town of Somerset and town of Chevy Chase also had a phased-in of at least 2 years. Just also notable to note is that there is pending state legislation, and that bans the use of state-purchased leaf blowers, and that also has a slight phase-in approach as well. And so just for consideration and discussion is whether or not the committee would like to consider a longer transition period for consumers and commercial landscapers to prepare for all-electric leaf blowers.
I appreciate the context, and I think this conversation has provided even more questions that need to be answered, right? And so first off, we're now going to adopt method 2 with regard to the reimbursement. How long would that take to draft the regulations, and then we have our legislative process, but that would be part of this conversation.
The drafting of regulations often takes way longer than anybody would hope to. So I can't give us the exact time frame, but it could be many months, before, it goes through the full approval process before it's ready to come to council.
Sure. I appreciate the candor. As we all work to streamline processes, right, across all facets of government. But clearly, because we want to adopt a method 2 regulation for the reimbursement, any start date would be contingent on that and be contingent on the approval of that. As I mentioned before, there needs to be a reconciliation with regards to the budget and whether or not the $300,000, as noted, should be front-loaded or should be better conformed to the timeline of this effective start date. And that might very well be answered in the budget that is submitted by the county executive on March 15th. Clearly, council has the opportunity to amend that budget, and so I think that might be part of the conversation as well. And then also, Ms. McCartney-Green, I appreciate the context with how other jurisdictions have phased this in. For all the advocates and neighbors who've been writing to me in support of it, citing Chevy Chase and citing DC to know that they have a 2 or 3 year in phased window. Whether it is just to educate and do the public education component, whether it is to get some of the regulations in order so that they can have a fair process for reimbursement. I don't necessarily know the answer to those questions, but to know that many of these companies operate in all these same areas, I think it would be the fair and equitable thing to have one timeline in which everyone can conform to. But what I've done is raise all the questions, which I don't think we can answer at this point, but certainly plays a factor in the timeline that is addressed in the legislation. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
I think the initial thinking about the kind of the streamlined time frame as compared to some of our neighboring jurisdictions was just, around the urgency of the issue. And now that, some of the jurisdictions around us have already put this in place, the thinking was that, maybe we can be a little bit more nimble. But the county executive is very much open to discussions on the timing, if a little bit longer time frame is necessary than initially contemplated.
For me, the biggest question regarding the timing is simply the reimbursement process, and making sure, one, that we have the money available and allocated to provide the reimbursements for the conversions. And then not only is that predicated on the budget, which will be forthcoming, but now it's also reliant on a method 2 regulation, which hasn't been drafted. And so the uncertainty of that timeline, I think, speaks for itself. Mr. Edwards.
I think it's safe to say that we will not have a regulatory approach to the incentives by the time the county executive submits his budget, which is a month away, basically, to the council. So,
and I understand that, but the point I was raising about the budget was about the 3 year time span for the reimbursements. That if the program is to have a fast-tracked approach for the reasons that Director Hochberg mentioned, and I I agree with that assessment that other jurisdictions are already on their way to this conversion, so we don't have to do a whole lot more to catch up. I agree with that. But if we want to provide money for all the companies, it should be within the time period when we want that conversion done, not sped over a 3-year lifetime. That's my take.
Yeah, I just meant in this budget cycle,
Yeah.
we would be, similar to the questions you asked about how did you come up with $100,000 for 3 years, we're going to need to refine that. And so we're not going to be able to give the county executive a budget number for this, I don't believe, for this budget cycle that says this is what the reimbursement program would cost. That's my
I will let you and the county executive have those conversations over the next month before that budget is officially submitted.
But
Councilmember Balcom.
my take on that is that without having several issues. Again, my biggest issue is the rebate program. Without having it established, you can't predict, you can't estimate the cost for the budget for FY24, which is further impetus to push the timing out. I think that there's so many uncertainties for the marketing outreach program, and I appreciate that you've done similar things before. It's a different population. The reimbursement program, I think so much of this bill relies on this reimbursement program that I don't think it's ready for 6 months or a year, 6 months to reduce the sale, or a year to take effect. I would push that out further. And similar to other jurisdictions, I appreciate that other jurisdictions around us have already done it, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to go through the same hoops of establishing the reimbursement program and communication program.
Thank you. This is a point I disagree with my colleagues on. I think given how you laid out the enforcement process about warnings and then working on a plan, putting it in place, the fact that once council would pass this bill, if it passes full council, it is 9 months before we would start banning the sales. And, I agree it would be good to get better budget numbers, but given the overall budget of the county, whether we do $100,000 this year or $200,000 in the kind of grand scheme of things, I think we should move forward with this, because if we delay it, are we saying we can't do it until next year's budget? And so, I agree we want to get this correct, but I would like to see us move forward as quickly as possible.
You want to
I do. So my point is that we don't know if it's 100,000 or 200 or 300, because there are a lot of issues with the rebate program. $300,000 is a very small number. It's a very small amount of money to offset costs. And when we look at the economic impact statement, and we look at the racial equity statement, and we look at almost at least half of the testimony we received, people are the assumption is that this rebate program is a robust program that is impactful, and $100 to 1,000 people is not a robust, impactful program. I would argue that we need to have a much broader discussion on the amount of the rebate program, because I think this rebate program is immaterial to the impact, the financial impact of the business owners.
I love this committee. Right? I do. We have really good, thoughtful conversations. And so I agree with both of my colleagues. And the concern I have with the timeline that Councilmember Stewart laid out is that the rebate program is critical to fulfilling the social justice and racial equity aspects of this law. That if we are imposing and mandating that these conversions take place, we have to provide incentives and rebates to some of the hardest working, least economically mobile members of our community who are doing this work day in and day out. That's the whole reason the rebate program is there. It's not for the huge landscaping companies. It is for the smaller independent ones, many of whom are immigrant, people of color. And so we want to help them. We need to help them, and that's why the rebate program is there. And to move forward without having the rebate program in place, I think puts them at the most disadvantage because we're requiring a conversion without providing the rebate. Now, the way to move forward, perhaps, in the most fair and equitable way, is to tie the start date of the legislation to perhaps say 6 months after the approval of the Method 2 regulation, right? Once the executive team, once DEP determines the best way to provide those incentives, we will approve it, and then the shot clock begins. And you will also have the communication plan in place because we're now foreshadowing all the work that needs to go into it.
Yeah, and I think given that we had changed the may to a must, we actually have to do it that way because we're saying we can't move forward with this program and the banning of the leaf blowers without a rebate program in place. So I think that is appropriate.
So
Right, because we changed it from a may to a must, and if we do that, then what we're saying is legally we can't actually move forward with this program unless the rebate program actually is in place. Right.
So in your determination, in your reading of this legislation, does anything need to change in order to satisfy those needs, given the timelines that are in the legislation? While it might say 6 months or 3 months, but in reality it's 9 months, but then it's also predicated on funding and regulation, which has not been written, much less approved.
If I can just speak to the two aspects of the legislation between the retail ban and the ban on use, is the consideration around the retail ban is that if somebody has to buy a new leaf blower, they're already subject to the cost of the leaf blower, and right now they're on equitable footing for much of the equipment. Not all of the commercial equipment is there yet in terms of cost, but the things that people are buying at our local stores, the residential equipment, the stuff that we would be banning, if they have to buy it anyway, the impact is not there with the retail use or retail purchase as much as there is with the use of replacing something they didn't need to replace yet.
What is the price differential between the two different?
For a residential piece of equipment, whether it's a handheld or a backpack, it's equitable. On the commercial scale, it's much higher. For the commercial level backpack blowers, those are still higher in cost. And of course, if they're doing this on a commercial level where they need multiple batteries, that's the extra level of cost, is having the batteries actually cost more than the piece of equipment. So when they have to have 2 or 3 batteries, but again, that's on the commercial scale, which is slightly different than the residential. What's being sold in our Home Depots, our Straw-Snyders, et cetera, except for we do have a couple of commercial distributors out there, but most of those pieces of equipment are the residential things that cost the same and don't need multiple batteries.
So are you making the case that while we wait on the timeline for the conversion and the overall ban, that we move forward with banning the the sale of new equipment.
It's a suggestion that I don't think the impact would make a difference. Delaying that, to my perspective, is
I think the other aspect of that is if we are enacting a law to ban the use of leaf blowers, gas-powered leaf blowers, you don't want someone going out and buying a gas-powered leaf blower. Because that, again, that's sending the wrong message, right?
Well, and also for our small businesses like our Stroh Schneiders and Aces, we want them to be able to plan what they're going to have in stock. So,
The other thing I would say is one thing we would want to do from the standpoint of outreach when the bill is passed, regardless of when it takes effect, is we'd want to start outreach at that point, because again, we don't want people going out and buying a new gas-powered leaf blower if in fact 6 months, a year and a half, 3 years, whatever the time frame is, that's going to be banned.
So, Ms.
Just for
McCartney.
clarity.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention also that the purchases would be that were prior to this law being effective. And so someone decided to purchase a gas-powered leaf blower after this law, they would not be eligible for reimbursement. And so it's for any purchases made prior to this law becomes effective.
So I think there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So if there's not a reimbursement after the law has been enacted, and somebody can still legally buy a leaf blower for 6 months after it's been enacted, there has to be some kind, and that relies on the marketing effort and working with the retail partners. Is there some type of, warning system or signage that, heads up, this is going to be illegal in 6 months or whatever? I just feel like there's a little bit of a gap there.
didn't we
and
do
I
that
don't
with
have-
Safe Grow? I feel like wasn't that done with Safe Grow in terms of some of the hardware?
law for the pesticide law required signage
Yeah.
for retail operators. I think that in this case, it would require going directly to the retailers. Steve's team already goes to the retailers to enforce what they're selling in terms of the decibel level that's on the shelf. And so that they already have communication with all of our retailers that sell leaf blowers within the county. Online is a whole nother, bailiwick, but when it comes to the online, the in-county retailers, we do have that.
I mean, broadly speaking, this is not a new concept of us changing some business practices, whether it is with the pesticides or whether it's food packaging, right? Other things that we regularly go into the retailers, and in this case, we know who the retailers are. There aren't a whole lot of mom and pop shops open nowadays, unfortunately, and so they are mostly big box or ACE affiliated independent hardware stores. So the question, I think, before the committee is if we want to separate out the effective date for the reimbursement for the rebate program and the conversion, and then also for the sale ban in retail. I'm comfortable with the sale ban, right? And that would be 6 months after enactment. Well, good clarifying question. Would it be 6 or 9?
As for it would be 6, but from our perspective in terms of that's already in county law,
Yep.
months after, so technically it's 9 months before publication and outreach notification, 9 months. It is written 6 months, so I would.
It's helpful.
That's what you're here for. Thank you. We appreciate it. So I'm comfortable with that. Okay. Is that it?
No,
No. Sorry.
it's not. Stay tuned.
The bad signal again.
Bad
Yeah.
signal. A couple issues. One is I would like to propose an amendment for the farmers in the ag reserve. We've heard from that's okay. This electric leaf blowers are a real burden for farmers out in the field. They're from the perspective of, and they use the leaf blowers for a number of issues out there, and it would be particularly difficult for them to have enough batteries, enough battery packs to last the whole day out there without any electrical source. So I think I put a amendment that does not apply to, the exemption would be that the chapter does not apply to agricultural producers located in the agricultural reserve. Activities of agricultural producers must be consistent with the definition under Section 2B. And this would exempt the agricultural producers in the ag reserve. So not everyone in the ag reserve and not gardens in the suburbs. So specifically farmers in the ag reserve.
I had just a couple of questions, and I think this is probably for you all. And I thank Councilmember Balcom for raising this. And I know we had a lot of conversations about this, but batteries generally cost $250. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, but Mary has done way more market research.
Yeah.
Let her answer.
It's going to vary on the equipment and also as technology changes. So each company gets to set their own pricing, and the backpack batteries might be a different cost than the handheld batteries. The commercial batteries are actually heavier. They might be more expensive, but they might also last longer. So there's a lot of variability.
I'm just trying to also understand. So if the farmers say that they don't last, the charge doesn't last as long, they would probably, for the gas leaf blowers, be also having to have gas with them so this would just, if they had extra batteries, that would replace additional gasoline they would have to be carrying out into the fields.
If I could just speak to that based on my limited knowledge.
Yeah.
That over time, ultimately, the cost will come down to operate these machines for anyone. But I would say that when it comes to what the agricultural producers, and I don't actually support the battery theory. It's actually the equipment can't handle that kind of abuse that it gets in agricultural operations. So what we know from the folks who train everyone to use these efficiently, they need to be stored properly. They need to be kept level. They can't be bashed around. They can't be thrown in the back of the truck. So people even adapt their trailers and everything to carry this equipment properly. And I would say from the agricultural perspective, I think they would be more justified in saying this equipment is not going to last the way it's built right now. So I actually would, in a way, myself, knowing what I know about leaf blowers, say it doesn't have to do with the cost. It has to do with that piece of equipment being able to be used in an agricultural setting, and that I would find more challenging for them.
Great. That was incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for that insight. So I'm supportive of this, but like before when we talked about getting reporting back, I wonder if this is something we should get a report back on the technology, how things are advancing, instead of just standing that farmers in the ag reserve would be exempt for forever from this. So
I don't want to speak for you.
Well, I think that it's important to keep tabs on the technology overall. So yeah, I think that would be important. Mm-hmm. Nope.
So whether or not it's codified in the amendment, we will be having regular updates,
Yep.
right? So maybe we just make sure that is part of the conversation when we do the annual update on this program. And just like everything else, this is legislation, and it can always be amended based on technology, based on the needs of the day, and so that remains an open-ended opportunity.
And I'm fine with that as you're making other edits and suggestions, if that works, yes.
Yeah, and so as introduced, I think you guys looking at the language, this would stay, but the annual reporting will provide information on agricultural producers' technology and whether it's been upgraded to, I guess, meet the demand, right? Is that yeah? So that would just be included in the reporting as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Without objection on the amendment?
Yep.
Great.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
And then the other, I think, big issue, all my issues are big, the MCPS and I find it difficult to ask private businesses to comply with something that we're not asking our own government to do. And I feel like in the impact statement, it does talk about how much it would cost to replace the equipment for both agencies. But the standing remains that we're asking residents and private businesses to do something that the government isn't doing. Similarly, with the bill at the state level, the bill may or may not go forward, may or may not pass. So I think that MDOT, I don't know if MDOT, MCDOT uses electric. I think they don't. All electric. I don't know if, do we know if Maryland DOT, what they use? So we have their leaf blowers in the county. I think that this is a philosophical issue that I'm uncomfortable asking private industry to do something that the government's not doing.
If I may respond, both NCPS and Park and Planning are considered state agencies, and that's why we were not able to mandate that they comply. But both of those agencies are already taking steps. So MCPS has shared through their reporting on the quarterly climate action plan updates that they have already started to replace broken gas-powered leaf blowers with electric. So as they break down, all of those replacements are being done with electric equipment. And the parks, Montgomery Parks has reported that they are no longer purchasing gas leaf blowers. In this fiscal year, they used approximately $500,000 that they had in vacancy savings from their budget for the purchase of electric landscaping equipment. So they are already making big inroads that way. And as Mary shared, our MCDOT, all the depots already use electric blowers. In our Department of General Services, they have 3 vendors that service county facilities, and so included in the fiscal impact statement would be the impact, the cost impact for those vendors to change out their equipment, so that the county, everything that is within the county's control would be compliant.
I appreciate that. And I know that there's the estimate in the fiscal impact statement is there. There's just, so the fiscal impact statement does include replacement for DOT, but, so that might be an error if DOT's already converted.
I believe that's a timeline error of when the fiscal impact statement went in versus when they've purchased their equipment.
So that would need to change, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, the chair had to step away for a moment. Councilmember Balcom, do you have anything else, or?
Yeah, I guess I feel like there's just a lot of questions. I'm uncomfortable supporting the bill without the rebate program in place. So I just need to be clear that the law won't go into effect until the council approves the regulation, which would include the rebate program. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mentioned that I'm uncomfortable without having full understanding of the rebate program, and clarified that the bill won't actually go into effect until the council has approved the regulation.
Correct. Correct. and I appreciate Councilmember Balcom's mention of the other state-mandated agencies in this large system that we have here. We should always be leading by example, which is your point. And in this instance, the county government is leading by example, as noted. MCDOT and other agencies have already made this conversion or are already on the way to do so. When we take up the budget and have other oversight opportunities with park and planning and with MCPS, I encourage you and everyone else to ask what they're doing. It is not unique to this conversion, but it's also related to green buildings and recycling and composting and everything that we all care about as members of this committee, and DEP cares about as well. And we should continue doing everything we can to push other agencies
Right.
to
So
modernize.
to that point, I think that it's important for the county in FY24 to convert 100% of any gas blowers that we currently have control over. 100% should be converted now.
I agree.
So,
Good. Thank you. I'm not sure there are any other items to discuss. So I'll just say that this was a really productive work session. I quite frankly wish we had this discussion last year so the timetables would have already been sped up, but that did not happen for whatever reason. I was not chair of the committee back then, but there was a lot going on last fall, right? Lots of changes. And so here we are now, and again, the most important aspect of this not only is the conversion from gas-powered leaf blowers to electric, but also providing rebates for those impacted the most by that. And we have to make sure that the rebate program is operational and targets the communities that have been identified in the social justice and racial equity report. And we have to wait for these regulations and more of a framework before we begin that. And so I am comfortable with the path that we're on, with the banning of the sale of these in 6 months, and we will look to DEP to see how quickly these Method 2 regulations can be sent to us, and we'll also be looking into the budget to see how front-loaded some of this conversion can be. So I am supportive. Any other comments? So, okay, that's unanimous. Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
ready to go home.
There we are. No. That's it.
Yeah.
Do you need to take a break?
No,
Okay, good.
I'm just saying, like,
So moving from noise and air and health pollution from leaf blowers, we are transitioning to noise and air and health effects related to the Montgomery County Air Park. And I see Mr. Trumpka is getting himself situated. No, well played, I like that.
Pun very intended, right?
Seatbelts on, chairs in an upright position.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting clearance that this conversation can take off. Are we done with the puns? No? Are we gonna, we're gonna continue going?
Keep going.
Okay, going the distance here. Okay, let me just get situated. So Mr. Trumka and Ms. Simmons, appreciate you all for starting this conversation about the air park. And much like the previous conversation we had, this has been sitting at the committee's desk for a while. And it had not been picked up, and I wanted to make sure that we dusted off this report and have a public conversation about it, as there's been many conversations in the community about the air park, notwithstanding some of the public safety issues that happened over the last number of months, causing widespread power outage as well. And so for those reasons, wanted to have this conversation. Don't know if other colleagues have anything you want to say. We'll turn it over to you. Great, thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning. My name is Caitlin Simmons, and this is my colleague Aaron Trumpka with the Office of Legislative Oversight.
Is your mic on?
It is.
Okay. Oh, no, I hear you.
We appreciate the opportunity to brief the T&E Committee on OLO Report 2022-2, the Montgomery County Air Park Regulatory Framework and Community Impacts. Thank you to the Montgomery County Revenue Authority, which we have a representative with us today, and the stakeholders for their assistance on this report. So this report was written in response to the Council's request to better understand the governance, regulatory framework, and community impacts of the Montgomery County Air Park. Some specific items that were requested to be researched included annual air park operations and impacts of the air park on the community, including noise and environmental impacts. The report was released in January 2022. So we will take less than 20 minutes to provide an overview of the report, including the air park's governance and operations. We'll then discuss the regulatory framework governing the air park and the history of land use of the surrounding areas. Following that, an overview of the environmental and noise impacts of the air park, as well as community engagement and feedback will be given. Finally, we'll present report findings and discussion items for council consideration. So I'll start off with an overview of the air park and its governance. So the Montgomery County Air Park is located about 2 miles northeast of the city of Gaithersburg and opened in 1960. It is owned and operated by the MCRA. It's a general aviation airport, which is defined as a public use airport that does not have scheduled services, unlike a commercial airport. The Federal Aviation Administration reports that general aviation airports are used for activities such as personal flying, flight instruction, charter services, and disaster relief. So the air park is included in the FAA's National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, which is an inventory of airports that the federal government considers significant to national air transportation. It is also designated by the FAA as a regional airport, which is defined as one that supports regional economies by connecting communities to national markets, as well as a reliever airport, which is defined as an airport designated to minimize congestion at large commercial service airports. Due to its inclusion in the national plan, the air park is eligible for FAA grants and has received many of these grants for capital improvements and projects that allow the airport to remain in compliance with federal standards. The obligations associated with these grants will be discussed later in the presentation. So this chart shows FAA grants received by the air park from 2005 to 2020. Many of the projects were for the improvement of air park safety, such as improving lighting and removing obstructions from runway protection zones. The total number of grants received by the air park from the FAA from 2005 to 2020 was about $19.6 million. Next, let's look at the air park's operations. So the air park's runway is open for public use 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and does not close for holidays. There are 3 main air park uses, which falls into the following 3 categories: travel and recreation, pilot training, and military related. Pilots determine whether to fly in and out of the air park based on FAA guidance and their pilot handbooks. The airport cannot regulate the size or types of aircraft that use the runway. In general, the air park runway is suitable for most aircraft that seat 12 or fewer passengers. Per federal and state guidelines, the air park manager is responsible for measuring annual aircraft takeoffs and landings. The FAA tasks General Aviation Airport Managers, which is the MCRA in case of the air park, with the responsibility of measuring takeoff and landings, which are referred to as operations. The airpark manager submits annual operation counts to both the FAA and the Maryland Aviation Administration. The counts are estimated a couple of ways. So the MAA sets up a measuring device generally every 3 or 4 years to estimate operations. The airpark operator also reviews fuel consumption and other services used to estimate operations for years without the MAA count. Airport operations are further classified by local or itinerant types, which is based on the proximity of aircraft operations in relation to the airport. The most common operation at the airpark is local, which is defined as flights known to be departing for or arriving from a 20-mile radius of the airport. So OLO obtained FAA data from 1998 to 2021 on the number of operations at the airpark. OLO notes the identical operation counts in successive years indicates that they are estimates and should not be looked at as precise measurements. The total operations at the airpark have decreased overall compared to its peak in 2002. However, from 2015 to 2019, there was a 33% increase in local operations compared to itinerant operations. This ratio of local to itinerant flights has persisted in 2020 and 2021.
So the Council President mentioned the interest in this in terms of the regulatory framework, so we're going to discuss the regulation of aviation and airports next. The FAA retains the sole authority to regulate aviation in the United States, period. The FAA requires, let's see if we can get this up, that airports which have received federal grants, and that includes the county airpark, to abide by certain assurances. Under these assurances, airports must make the airport available for public use on reasonable terms and without unjust discrimination to all types, kinds, and classes of aeronautical activities, including commercial aeronautical activities. Note the emphasis on the commercial activities. As a result of this federal policy regarding commercial use of airparks, the MCRA may not restrict the number of takeoffs and landings by air taxi, flight school, and other commercial ventures at the airpark. Federal law and regulations explicitly preclude non-federal agencies, including state and local governments, from setting rules that directly affect aviation. How far does this federal preemption of local regulation extend? That question has been answered definitively by the Supreme Court in a 1973 ruling that remains precedent today. In the case of the City of Burbank versus Lockheed Air Terminal, the Supreme Court reviewed a Burbank, California city ordinance that placed a nighttime curfew on flights from the Hollywood Burbank Airport. The Supreme Court upheld decisions by both the District Court and the Court of Appeals in finding the city ordinance unconstitutional, thus preempting state and local control over the regulation of aircraft noise. In sum, it's critically important for both council, county officials, and the residents to understand that the county has no power to regulate air traffic at the airport. But how can local governments minimize the effects of airport and aviation on local communities? The answer is by establishing land use, development, and zoning policies that recognize the inherent tension created between housing and an airport located in close proximity. As regards to the airpark, we need to look at how land use policies have evolved over the past 6 decades. When the airpark opened in 1960, most of the surrounding area was farmland. At that time, the county applied industrial zoning to about 160 acres immediately surrounding the airpark to serve as a buffer around the facility. However, soon thereafter, the county rezoned nearby properties and development of residential neighborhoods near the airpark began in the 1960s. The county continued to add residential land uses in the vicinity, and residents quickly occupied those homes. When the airpark opened in 1960, fewer than 1,000 housing units existed within a 5-mile radius of the site. The number of housing units in the vicinity then shot up exponentially. By 1980, more than 11,000 homes existed in the vicinity. By 2000, the number grew to more than 25,000. And by 2020, more than 30,000 housing units existed in the vicinity of the airpark. Another way to illustrate this is through aerial photographs depicting the change in land use patterns. The photo on the screen right now is from 1951, which predates the creation of the airpark, and the blue pin identifies the future location of the airpark central runway. By the early 1990s, as shown in this photo, industrial uses continued immediately to surround the airpark, but housing is now evident mostly to the southwest of the site. And by 2019, dense residential development nearly envelops the airpark, with the exception of less dense development in the environmentally sensitive Upper Rock Creek planning area to the east of the site. So it's clear that the county sought to achieve land use and housing production goals by placing homes in the vicinity of the airpark, and people moved into those homes. Rather than segregating housing from the airpark, county policy was to inform potential home buyers of the existence of the airpark in the area. In 1974, as development increased near the airpark, the council amended the county code to require that real estate agents disclose the existence of an airpark within a 5-mile radius of a property that is up for sale. We note, however, that in practice, this disclosure commonly occurs at closing, when buyers have already committed to the home purchase. The timing of this notification offers little opportunity for a buyer to thoughtfully consider the implications of living near an airport. Now let's discuss the economic impacts of the airpark. The FAA frequently cites economic benefits as a primary justification for promoting general aviation activity. The MAA periodically issues reports on the economic impact of aviation activity at the 35 public use airports in Maryland. The most recent report from 2018 estimated that the airpark generated $5.75 million in what they call business revenue. That is revenue received by firms providing services to general aviation aircraft that use the airpark. The same report found that the airpark generated 193 jobs, as well as $1.47 million in state and local tax revenue. We note that the economic impact in the MAA report are based on data reported by airpark owners.
This section discusses the environmental and noise impacts of the airpark and the agencies that hold regulatory authority over it. The following is an overview of the agencies that are responsible for monitoring environmental quality standards that are relevant to airports. At the federal level, the Environmental Protection Agency enforces federal lead concentration standards in soils, air, and drinking water. At the state level, the Maryland Department of the Environment oversees state implementation plans for air quality, in addition to the monitoring and enforcement of residential soil lead concentrations. At the local level, the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection is responsible for the protection of indoor and outdoor air quality in the county. So I'll quickly discuss lead pollution near airports, as it is a public health concern. After the ban of leaded gas for most motor vehicles in 1973, the concentration of lead in the air in the United States has decreased by 99%. However, a 2020 EPA report found that lead aviation fuel is the largest remaining source of lead emissions in air in the United States. Currently, there are no lead monitors near the airpark to confirm if lead levels are higher in the air near the airpark compared to other areas in the rest of the county. In 2021, in response to community concerns about lead concentrations near the airpark, the council requested the MDE to assess ambient lead concentrations for the airpark and its surrounding communities. However, the most recent emissions inventory reported ambient lead concentrations for the airpark was 0.125 tons a year, which falls below the EPA requirement for state air quality agencies to monitor. Now I'll give an overview of how noise is regulated. So prior to 1981, the EPA had the authority to monitor and regulate noise pollution. In 1981, the EPA determined that noise issues were best handled at the state and local level. In Maryland, the authority of noise enforcement was held by the state from 1981 to 2012 and was transferred to local governments in 2012. Now, DEP administers the county's noise control program consistent with the federally established threshold for airports. However, it should be noted that the DEP does not have the authority to enforce noise regulations for aviation-related noise. The FAA has that authority. OLO notes that the airpark is currently in compliance with the FAA noise regulations. Now I'll talk about the different venues for community engagement regarding the airpark and give an overview of frequent concerns that have been raised by community members. The Airpark Liaison Committee was established by the County Council in 1990 and served as the primary forum for communication concerning the airpark. In 2021, the ALC was dissolved and the MCRA assumed responsibility as the main agency for public outreach for the airpark. Since then, the MCRA has hosted multiple forums for community input on the airpark. They have invited stakeholders such as the FAA and MAA to answer questions from the public. So as long as residential communities have existed near the air park, there have been concerns raised about the compatibility of the air park with nearby residential areas. The East Montgomery Village neighborhood generates many of these concerns. Concerns frequently raised by community members include excessive noise and low-flying planes, the number of touch and goes, which is a flight maneuver where an aircraft lands and takes off again without coming to a full stop, alleged unsafe flight practices from flight schools and other aircraft, and lead pollution in the air and soils. Some steps that the air park has taken to mitigate its impact on nearby communities includes changing the flight patterns in 1973 to fly over less noise-sensitive areas, entering into an agreement with the flight schools to voluntarily reduce their operating hours, communicating with pilots about flying neighborly, and adding signage and guidance about local noise abatement guidelines, and entered into a program with the FAA to coordinate noise complaints to better respond to the public and avoid duplication of efforts.
So we're going to conclude with our discussion questions for council consideration. First, people who consider buying a home near the air park should be aware that the facility likely will continue to operate for the foreseeable future. The requirement for real estate agents to disclose the existence of an airport commonly occurs at closing, when buyers have little opportunity to consider the implications. We suggest council members consider whether to require disclosure at an earlier stage in the process, and it also might be appropriate for the notification to state that neither the airport operator nor the county have the authority to regulate airpark operations. Second, residents who have concerns about the air park frequently contact the county government, the MCRA, to register complaints. But as we've discussed, it's the federal government that has the sole authority to regulate aviation and explicitly prohibits local governments and airport operators from restricting access. Residents do, though, deserve an opportunity to raise their concerns to the entities who are authorized to regulate flight activity, and so we suggest discussing the optimal methods for channeling community concerns about the air park activity to the FAA. Third, while it cannot regulate aeronautical activity, the county could monitor compliance with federal noise and environmental standards. The council may wish to discuss with DEP the relative priority of expanding our noise and environmental monitoring near the air park within the county's overall environmental monitoring program. And fourth, the MCRA estimates the number of annual takeoffs and landings by observing general trends in air park activity, but we found recurrences of identical counts in successive years, demonstrating that these counts are really just general estimates. They are not precise measurements. The community would benefit from more precise estimates of the annual takeoffs and landings, and council members may wish to discuss with MCRA any opportunities to more precisely count takeoffs and landings. That is our summary of the report. Of course, there's much more information in the written document, and we'll be glad to answer questions. So, yeah, Mr. Miller is here from MCRA.
Excellent report. Thank you very much. I always appreciate perspective and historical background, and you've certainly provided that not only with the aerial maps, but with the growth, residential growth that has occurred around that property. Clearly, when it was built decades ago, residential concerns were not the concerns of the air park or of the county, but going from nearly 1,000, less than 1,000 to 30,000 is a large increase. That is right. Mr. Miller, good to see you. Appreciate you appreciate the work that you do. And I'm glad that you are here. I'll share with you that about a few years ago, clearly when more people during the height of the pandemic, when more people were home, the amount of emails and other forms of communication I received from folks in the vicinity of the air park increased exponentially, expressing concern. And the valid frustration that the residents have was shared with me. It was shared with members of our federal delegation as well. And when I had reached out to Congressman Trone's office, who is the member of Congress representing that area, he had written to the FAA and said that we need to do better. And when I shared that communication, people are looking at us to do something. and again, the perspective that you shared, that the FAA has the oversight here as the federal agency. I understand the frustration that residents have. And I too am frustrated that we can't do more, and so I appreciate also the comments and questions and path for improving certain aspects of the situation. Having upfront disclosures for prospective homeowners, I think, is really important, because I remember signing page after page, hundreds of pages at closing, and can't keep track of what it was. So I appreciate that. But before I ask my colleagues to speak, I'll ask the Revenue Authority CEO, is it? ED? CEO. Mr. Keith Miller, if you have any reflections on the presentation that was just provided.
Well, thank you, Chair Glass, and good afternoon, council members. The report I thought was excellent. I really did. I thought it did a comprehensive review of the air park. And to your point, I think as we look kind of, I think from the Revenue Authority standpoint, you know, we feel sometimes we're stuck, right? It's kind of a what can we do, what can't we do type of discussion. And I think we've got to continue discussions. We are, you know, we have been having meetings. We are going to continue to have. Our goal is to have quarterly meetings, open meetings, where we bring in different entities and representatives from the FAA, MAA to kind of discuss these points and best practices. I do want to emphasize, though, the Revenue Authority has taken several steps over the last couple of years. We have a full-time airport manager who regularly meets with the flight schools. We have regularly tried to communicate the community's concerns. We are advocating on behalf of the community to the users of the air park to make sure everybody's aware of their impact. And for the most part, I think that, you know, the actions of the pilots has shown that. In the last 3 years, I believe I think it's the last 3 years, if you look at the argument or the discussion about planes flying unsafe, too low, things of that nature, again, that's regulated by the FAA. In the last 3 years, there has only been one infraction cited by the Flight Standards District Office, and that was in the most recent accident, which you referenced before, Chair Glass, that knocked out the power. Otherwise, the FAA is monitoring this on a regular basis, and they have not cited anybody for flying around the airport, which means they are not flying too low. They are flying in compliance. And I think that's an important message to get out to the community, because I understand the concerns. I understand what's happening there. The other issue that we deal with is, you know, the number of, as you referenced, the number of complaints. And so we've constantly, and I think what we've seen is an uptick in the community references a lot the number of complaints that are going into the system. And in fact, as we looked at the data, and I think it's important to kind of take a look at that data and what's happening from the complaint standpoint. Since 2000 through 2023, there has been a total of 13,442 complaints issued. However, there's only been 52 unique households that have complained. So when you think about the number of complaints, it's 13,442 complaints, but 52 unique households in 3-year period. So as we look further into that data, 4 of those households alone account for 10,955 of those total complaints filed in the system, equating to 81% of the complaints filed were by 4 households. Very interestingly enough, the highest contributor to that filed 6,643 complaints since the recording system was established, which accounts for over 50% of the complaints. This is approximately 6 complaints a day for 1,125 days or 3 years. Those numbers, as we look at that and we calculate that into the consisting of the number of houses in a 2-mile radius, that is less than 0.5% of the households have complained. So I state this just because I think there's a concerted effort, and what we have to look at, another thing that I think is worth an open discussion is how do we collect this data, what data, and how do we look at it? Because when you're inflating numbers like that, and our elitist, the person who complained the most has publicly stated or emailed us and told us they will complain every time a plane flies over their house. That's regardless of a noise complaint. It's regardless of a low-flying complaint. That's just to complain. So it's an interesting balance in what we have to do, but we have to look at that. I'll give you just a little bit more data in that if we just look at the last month here, in January of 2023, there was a total of 1,177 complaints filed from 8 households. 2 of those households account for 1,108 of those complaints, which is 94% of the total complaints lodged that month. This is a daily average of 35 complaints by those individuals. Here's an example, again, of how we're inflating numbers and what we're trying to look at. So some of the examples is on February 7th, 2023, there were 33 complaints filed on aircraft N38657 from the same individual within a 3-minute duration for a single flight lesson. That same individual filed another 37 complaints within a 5-minute duration for aircraft N3054T, again for a single flight lesson on the same day. That's an average of 9 complaints per minute. So I share that information not to say that it isn't a nuisance and there isn't valid complaints out there, but as we look at this in the context of everything, we have to, again, realize that the information and numbers that are sometimes being thrown out there and being discussed are being inflated. And we need to have a real discussion about what the impacts are and how they're really impacting the community. And so,
thank you for sharing that. I want to welcome the District 7 Council Member, Councilmember Luedtke. Welcome to the conversation for your district, regarding your district. Mr. Miller, I just have a clarifying question. How are complaints lodged? And let me also say, I don't want to focus too much on the complaints, because the purpose of this is to try and provide relief and see what we as county government can do and as the Revenue Authority can do to ease some of these burdens, not to delegitimize them in any way.
Oh, I agree, and thank you for that clarification. I am not trying to do that. What I'm trying to do is state that we need to balance it, we need to understand so we can have a balanced discussion. I think, we have to listen to everybody, and we do. So the way the complaints are filed right now is they're filed through through the Air Park website. We started this back in 2019. We didn't have a mechanism really before that to continue to monitor the complaints because, to your point, the complaints coming into the Revenue Authority we were just trying to, based on the voice of the community, trying to gather data as far as who is complaining, what is the issues, how can we address them. In reality, as OLO stated in their summary, these complaints really need to go to the FAA. They need to go to the FAA Noise Ombudsman for noise complaints and the Flight Standards District Office, FSDO, for the safety concerns. Those are the 2 departments where these complaints need to be channeled to. We are in regular contact with them because we want to kind of discuss and look at what is happening at the airport. One of the things that we've done recently is we had a representative from the Flight Standards District Office meet with our largest flight school out there to talk about flight safety and what's happening. Our airport manager is having a meeting this week with our airport users, and again, we are pulling in the FAA to actually do a presentation that gives the pilots recertification, and it talks about noise and community impacts. So we're advocating and working with the FAA to try and address the community's concerns. What we have to better understand is exactly what it is that we're asking for. Right, so this is where the discussion is currently going with our public meetings with the community, is we're trying to get down to what is it that we're trying to impact, so this way we can figure out how do we bring that to the FAA and address and try and get either some more voluntary regulations with the users of the air park, as well as what we put together and bring to the FAA and try and propose as a solutions.
Appreciate that. I'll open it up to colleagues. Councilmember Luedtke.
So thank you for your comments. And, you know, I know that you've been carrying on a conversation to keep the dialogue going, but presently there isn't a formalized mechanism that the county runs for the air park and community stakeholders to engage. Is that correct?
That is correct. The ALC was the last formal, yes.
Okay. And it's critical, as you noted, for the FAA to be involved in these discussions or to have a formal dialogue so that stakeholders can bring items of interest to the FAA directly, since they oversee everything, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And you mentioned the volume of different complaints and things that are getting filed, and that they're coming from a rather small group of folks within the community. And I know it's a federal crime to interfere with flight operations in the sense of interfering with a cabin member, interfering with the plane operation itself. And, you know, this doesn't really fit in that bucket of interference with flight operations, but yet it's ongoing and constant and persistent. So, you know, what would you ask us as the council to do in terms of helping to alleviate that and to finding a better mechanism for routing that information?
That's a great question. I think, you know, one of the things that we found, and I know when we had the discussion with OLO when they were coming out for the report, was the Air Park Liaison Committee. I think it voices, and I've been 17 years in my current role, so I've been involved with the ALC in those years. It provides that forum. The challenging part that I've always noticed throughout the years kind of goes back to the regulations themselves, right? So what can you actually do? And I think that as I've learned, as I go through basically a 5-year cycle where we get different community representatives that come in, we go through a full dialogue of what can and can't happen at the airport, what is happening at the airport, kind of go through all the questions, and then it tends to calm down and then comes back up again when a new group. So I think the biggest thing that we could ask for, I think, is the purchase of the property. And I think looking at that and how people are notified before they purchase that home, I really think is critical. I also think we have to take a further look at that as far as the 5-mile radius. Because what I understand is, I know I live up in Clarksburg. I'm not in a 5-mile radius of the airport. However, it was in my paperwork that I lived within 5 miles of an airport. So I think that has to be a little bit better clarified as well as the pre-notion to that. The second piece and the other piece to your question, so that's number one. Number two is, yes, I don't have an issue with the Revenue Authority holding the public meetings. However, I think that puts us in a tough position, right? As the operator of the airport, to be hosting the meetings and hosting the dialogue, right? It's kind of puts us in a tough position. So having that independent entity or where we could have those meetings and those community discussions, I think is a little bit more transparent. It's a little bit better for the community. So that's where we are.
Thank you. And I do want to note that there is pending legislation in the Maryland General Assembly presently that would expand the Maryland Aviation Authority to include representation from a community stakeholder group. And so that, you know, they do appear to be looking at the Maryland Aviation Authority about expanding that and having that more formalized mechanism for input within the commission at the state level for community stakeholder groups. So having a formalized, not run by the owner of the air park group available to lodge those community concerns would be important in the bigger, broader scheme at the state level as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you for that, and thank you for coming. So on the first question that we were just talking about regarding the notification, I definitely think we should move forward on that. And however, since Delegate, I did again, Councilmember Lukey, I'm just forever going to do this. Since it is in your district, happy to help if we want to partner on writing something regarding the county code. I think we should move on that. I have a question. I don't think it was covered. Why was the ALC dissolved in 2021?
The ALC was a very unique animal in that it was a citizen advisory committee in the legislative branch. Almost every other citizen advisory committee that the county has is staffed and run by the executive branch. It was actually staffed by the gentleman who's the current chair of the planning board. So Jeff, and it was a sounding board without any ability to do anything other than be a sounding board in probably the wrong branch of government. And so a little bit of an opinion, it wasn't achieving its goal. People had an opportunity to speak, but nothing much could happen from it. The council are not implementers, and as you've heard from both Mr. Miller and from us, the target audience has to be the FAA over and over and over again. And it quite frankly, put the council in an awkward position. How are you going to respond to this where you're handcuffed?
That's very helpful. Thank you for that background. I have a question. Why do people do touch and goes?
Great question. It's a training mechanism.
Oh, okay.
The FAA, in a meeting that we had in June of, I'm mixing the years now, June of 21, I believe we had a meeting with the FAA, and the Eastern Regional Director was on that, and she explained that it's a very important maneuver for training. I will just add one bit to this. One of the conversations, an interesting topic, one of the conversations that came up at the ALC for a number of years was, can we eliminate touch and goes? Can we eliminate touch and goes? And so we went through an experiment. And here's how we went through the experiment. We were under construction on the taxiway system. And so we had to, because of safety issues, really what was happening was planes were landing. They had to what's called back taxi. They had to land, they had to turn around on the runway and come back to the other end. So we had to stop touch and goes because of safety issues that was allowed by the FAA for a period of times during this construction. The complaint process actually did not go down. What we found at that time period was that residents were complaining that touch and goes was still happening when they weren't happening. And it's because here's the other mechanism, the other maneuver. The other maneuver then, if you stop a touch and go, it means that you have to do a full stop before you go. So that the plane would have to land, stop, taxi off the runway, and then go back, and then they could take off again immediately. So what this represented to the community was about a minute delay for them seeing them overpassing, so they still thought they were doing a touch and goes. Just thought it was an interesting experiment and discussion with the ALC at the time, but that is the purpose behind it, is a training purpose.
Just a little bit additional context. So flight training is a key element at the airpark. Landing and takeoffs are much more critical and need many more rehearsals, and so the purpose of that is to give the student more and more opportunity. So, you know, from the FAA's point of view, where we want to train future pilots, it's a very critical move. But you can understand from the community's point of view, the planes are touching, coming down to, and just circling around the airpark and coming down again. And so there's this constant rotation of flights, and you can see why it's necessary from the pilot training point of view, but you can also see why it's an annoyance to the community.
I could just add one more thing. The latest thing that we're working on as a voluntary, so as OLO reported, there's a voluntary no touch and go training activities between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., which is overall being adhered to. The other piece that we're working on right now, and this again, because of the grant assurance, is very tricky for us, but what we are trying to do is establish a volunteering of the number of aircraft touch and going in the pattern at the same time. So we're asking the pilots and the flight schools to limit the number of aircraft doing touch and goes in the pattern at a time to try and lower that impact on the community. This actually came out of one of the other recent reports on that was concluded at the request of the county executive. And we took that piece to work with the community. Again, we have to be very careful because of the grant assurances. We can't mandate it, we can't be restrictive, but we're asking for it on a voluntary basis. And the flight schools are adhering to it. They are. So that impact, again, it's another way, how do we impact? So we are taking another step in that regard.
Thank you. My final thing is on, I think the last question was, the third question on monitoring the environmental impacts. And I'd ask my colleagues if they would be inclined to have the committee request DEP let us know what it would be to particularly look at the lead content in the air and soil. On page 43 of the OLO report, you kind of show the areas that may be impacted and the homes in that. And at the moment, I believe you reported that we're not collecting any of that. If you want to speak to that.
Right. So the MDE, which is the state Maryland Department of the Environment, they do the lead soil concentration studies, and they're saying that the EPA concentration, the threshold for monitoring, the air park is below it. So the monitoring threshold is 1 ton of ambient lead concentration in the air, and the air park is at 0.125 tons a year. So it's well under.
1/8. Mm-hmm. And to your point, council member, yeah, we think there has to be a conversation with DEP, recognizing in context of your previous conversation, there's a trade-off because they have limited resources for their environmental compliance. And so we didn't want to say there should be more in the air park. We're saying we should ask the DEP how that fits with their overall framework of environmental compliance throughout the county and see whether or not there's capacity to do more there.
Exactly.
Without drawing away from somewhere else that may or may not be of same or more need.
Exactly. And I think that is a good thing to just request of DEP, not to mandate something out of the box, but to ask them for their recommendation, particularly given what the state agencies are showing. Just knowing that in this area, it looked like a number of households got caught in that area, that would be good to ask DEP whether or not we should at least be doing some benchmarking there.
If I can add to that, last year, in the spring of last year, President Biden announced an initiative. In the fall of last year, the first unleaded fuel across all aircraft was announced that they had produced and the FAA had authorized it. So what we are waiting for in the system right now is the infrastructure to be built, that can be rolled out. So I'm hopeful that in the next 3 to 5 years, we will see the complete rollout of unleaded fuel in all aircraft, which would be everybody would be very thankful for. So just wanted to add that.
I appreciate those questions, and maybe my colleagues can help, or even Mr. Miller. Is the state legislative district where the air park is that 39 or 14? 39. It's 39. Okay. So perhaps asking our Senator King and the 3 delegates over there to help with state efforts to support. Okay. Councilmember Balcom.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for being here, and thank you for the report. So I agree with Councilmember Stewart about the notification. I think that's needs to happen much sooner and more deliberately for that. Although I'm sure that people who are currently living there and putting up with it aren't going. I mean, it's a detriment to them. But I think that's something that we should look at. And then in terms of the Air Park Committee, Liaison Committee. So I'm familiar with the Air Park just in my prior position. The Air Park fell in my jurisdiction, and we've heard about. I fully get that the ALC didn't have the proper audience, and perhaps there's a way. Have you talked with the FAA? Would they be willing to have something like this for them, for the community to meet on a regular basis with the FAA?
So the FAA over the years, and again, we'll raise it. That goes back to my discussion earlier about the complaints and trying to understand what's really going on. We have to understand what the ask is. The FAA wants to know what the ask is before they go and send a representative. And so that, to me, is the biggest point. The FAA doesn't want to, at least in previous, and for clarity, this was several years ago when the ALC was in, but when we would invite them in the past, the FAA didn't want to come and just sit in community meetings just to have a roundtable discussion. However, if we can centralize what is the ask, what are we trying to do? This has always been a challenge, even with the Air Park Liaison Committee. It was always a challenge to really, when you get down to what are you asking for and to do, it's very hard to describe and come up with something. But I think if we can continue those discussions and get that, then we could make the request to the FAA to come and have that come.
Yeah, I think that the most salient point, I think, is that the county, certainly the county council, county executive, you don't have control over this air park. It's the FAA. And I know that you've conveyed that to the community. I think that there's value in looking at what mechanism is the best mechanism to get community input, even if it's just to the point of saying, what are the 3 things that we need to tell the FAA, as opposed to just continually hearing the same complaints and the same arguments.
If I may, Council Member, and in terms of the question of what is the ask, I think it'll be helpful to discuss, are we talking about asks that are Montgomery County Air Park specific or general aviation nationally generic? Because the FAA may be more interested in responding in issues that affect general aviation nationally, and there may be some allies with similar concerns in communities around the country who also have general aviation facilities there. And so
I think that's a really great point, because FAA isn't going to change the way they do business for one airport, which brings to the other issues of looking at noise and environmental impacts, but and then the number of takeoffs. For me, the number of takeoffs isn't the issue; it's the noise. If the touch and goes didn't make noise, who cares how many times they go up and down? I mean, there might be a aesthetic to it, but so I do think that we do have a responsibility to monitor the noise, and so I'd be interested in looking at how to do that. Because if the airport is in complete compliance, that goes to your question of, do the overall rules that the FAA follows need to change? And I think that it's the guarantee that the air park is in compliance. So I know you've certainly have data on that.
So there is, I agree with you. The issue is, what program do you put in place? So I know there are programs around. The FAA has actually discussed with me a program that was around Newark Airport measuring noise. And it's actually noise monitors that actually go on a pole. And then there's a light on it, from what I understand, and it goes red if the noise decibel is up and things of that nature. And then they can correlate that directly with an airplane flying over, and so that's where they can correlate and say what was the impact of that aircraft. Those systems are expensive. The FAA isn't going to fund a system like that, but again, if that's something that the county was willing to support, or we could get support from a different level, I think to your point, that would be putting the noise monitors right out into the community and being able to measure that and determine what is an aircraft and what isn't.
So the FAA doesn't have a requirement to monitor the noise?
No, what the FAA does is what they call Part 150 studies. And so the Part 150 study that was done was in 92, 93, I think it was, is that right? So it was in that time period, 92, 93. And what they do at that point is that's when they do the measurements out in the field, and they take all the calculations and stuff of that nature. The interesting, in looking at that, as you look at it, it's 30 years later, and so, is it time to update that study? The discussions that come into that are a number of discussions. Number one, the number of aircraft flying at that time was significantly higher than what is there now. The type of aircraft was significantly louder than what is there now. So from the FAA standpoint, they would conclude that, well, no, your noise impact is even going to be less. And then if you run it, this has been a discussion I've had with the community on several occasions. If you run it the other scenario, let's just run the other scenario for a second, and say that 65 DNL measurement goes out, which it's right now, it's at the end of the runway. So it has to go out a significant distance to touch somebody's home. If it goes out to touch somebody's home, what happens? Nothing. The number of aircraft flying doesn't change. There's no restrictions that are put on the aircraft and things of that nature. What you do become eligible for is potentially some funding from the FAA for insulated windows or more insulation in your home, things of that nature. However, the complaint isn't when you're in the house with your windows closed, right? The complaints from the neighbors and talking to them is when they're in the backyard or in the spring when the windows are open, things of that nature. So again, as you run down that scenario, and I know that's a hard discussion to have, but as you run down that scenario, really that goes back to what are you trying to really accomplish and what is the ask and what you're trying to do. Because as I publicly testified in Frederick County, when the Frederick Airport was considering development around its airport, I went up and publicly testified that the FAA's 65 DNL doesn't represent what happens out in the community. That plane flying over causes disruption. It causes disruption in communication. But the fact is that the regulation in the FAA determines how noise is measured. That's it. That's what we have to live with. It's been challenged numerous times. So it's kind of a lot to that point, but hopefully I answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, really good discussion, Mr. Miller. I'm glad you were here. Thank you. Clearly, there is consensus in looking into the notification for potential future homeowners, and I suspect that's something that we can all work on together to make sure that people are aware of the issues of a particular community before they buy. And then also, the last comment that you just made, Mr. Miller, about the flights over the last number of years, and this relates to homeownership as well, that it needs to be reiterated that the total flight operations is down nearly 50% from its height in 2000, approximately. But I'm sure that there's been a lot of turnover since then. So no one knows the decrease. All they know is that there is a 30% or so increase from over the last number of years. And all those data points are real, undisputed. It's just about the context. And I most certainly will be sharing this PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully you can email it to us, because I think it is really worthy of the neighborhood and residents. And I know the district Councilmember Ludke, will share it wide and far as well. And perhaps we also bring in next time our District 39 delegation to see how the state can support these efforts, recognizing that it should not be the county council or the county government's sole obligation to compel FAA to do better. But we definitely need our state representatives to do so as well.
And we'll contact the council attorneys about the interest in the legislation. I will mention that probably makes sense to talk to the realtor community about this too, and we'll follow up on the DEP item too.
There we go. Very good. Without any other comments, this committee is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.